And that jarring cacophony tells you that, yet again, you're with the Power of Three podcast, joining us as we travel for new adventures with the Doctor. And literally in this case, we are travelling for new adventures. We're continuing our run looking at those original novels that were too broad and too deep for the small screen, looking at the novels that were published in the 1990s by Virgin Books. I'm Kenny Smith, and today we're looking at Deceit, which was the 13th novel in the New Adventures range, and this one was written by Peter Darvill-Evans, who was of course the range editor when it got underway. This one was published on my dad's 61st birthday, I quickly did the maths there, on the 15th of April 1993, and it featured a cover by Lewis Ray. This was Lewis's only cover for the New Adventures range, and it's an absolute cracker. We've got a spaceship with an observation deck, and the main image is asteroids in the shape of screaming faces with their mouths wide open, and you can see their teeth. And looking at this are Abslom Daak, Dalek Killer, from the pages of Doctor Who magazine, and standing beside him is Ace, wearing what appears to be some sort of headset, very similar to the ones that we would wear if we were doing a Zoom call or MS Teams call in the 21st century. We can also see there's a ladder or some sort of walkway, I think it'd be fair to say, with people walking on it, and underneath that we can see some orange stars and planets and such likes. And it's in a tasteful pink sort of background for the New Adventures and Deceit, on which the title is set. What else can we tell you about this book? Well, it features the Seventh Doctor, Ace and Bernice, and this has the return of Ace after her departure in Love and War. And it was also the first novel to have crossover elements from Doctor Who magazine's comic stories, which were running at the same time. And the events of the strip Nemesis of the Daleks, which was written by Paul Cornell, as I recall, were directly referenced. And also of note is that this was the first Doctor Who novel to exceed 300 pages in length. So we've had a look at the front, let's have a look at the back and see what that has to say. Take Arcadia apart if you have to. The middle of the 25th century. The Second Dalek War is drawing to an untidy close. Earth's Office of External Operation is trying to extend its influence over the corporations that have controlled human-occupied space since man first ventured to the stars. Agent Isabel de Vries is leading one expedition. Among her barely controllable squad is an explosive expert who calls herself Ace. Their destination? Arcadia, not the one in Gallifrey. A non-technological paradise, a living laboratory for a centuries-long experiment, fuel for a super being. Even when Ace and Benny discover the truth, the Doctor refuses to listen to them. Nothing is what it seems to be. As ever, we like to bring you readings from the novels, and in this case we're going to kick off with the prelude to the book, which was the Doctor Who magazine exclusive introduction for the novel, acting as a prequel, a tease, to encourage you to go out and spend money to buy the actual novel. This prelude appeared in DWM issue 198, and this reading has been done for us by our regular co-conspirator, our pal, and all-round nice fella, Mr. Dave Steele. Over to you, Dave.
From Breakout to Empire, Essays on the Third Millennium, edited and published by Federation archivist Ven Kalik. Extract from the editor's introduction. It is a commonly held misconception that the breakout, that explosive mass migration of humankind across interstellar space that began in the closing years of the 21st century, was the result of intolerable conditions within the solar system. Various causes of widespread dissatisfaction have been suggested. The necessity of avoiding cognitive dissonance ensured that each and every colony developed a tradition that, however harsh the conditions on the newly settled planet, things had been worse on Earth. By the time 100 new worlds had been explored, there were 100 different myths about the appalling situation from which the colonists had escaped. These myths have become accepted as truths and have been reiterated in academic works published not only by human historians, but also by Draconians and Arcturans. Scholars have entered into heated debates. Was the principal cause of the migration overpopulation, or environmental degradation, or alien invasion? None of these theories is supported by the facts. Although it is true that Earth was supporting a population that seems barely credible by contemporary standards, the worst of the overcrowding was over. Earth's population had been in decline since the early 21st century, thanks to a combination of plagues, birth control measures and, most importantly, the development of instant transport systems that allowed for the rapid colonisation of the other planets and moons in the solar system. Although it is true that Earth's oceans and atmosphere were badly polluted, the situation had stabilised by the middle of the 21st century, and thereafter most pollution indicators showed a gradual improvement. It is true that even at this early stage, humankind had been menaced by hostile alien beings, but retrospect tends to telescope history so that the popular view of pre-breakout Earth is a planet permanently besieged. In fact, at the time of the breakout, humankind was at peace with its neighbours. The threats from the Cybermen and then from the former Martians were past, and the near destruction of human life on Earth in the early stages of the first Dalek War was still almost a century in the future. If not overcrowding, pollution or war, what was the impulse that drove millions of people to abandon their home? Warp ship technology was almost untried. The ship's owners, Earth-based corporations whose wealth and power were already beyond the control of governments, demanded extortionate payment for every outbound berth. Why would anyone expend his life savings to leave a solar system that had apparently already seen its darkest days? The answer, I suggest, lies in the perception of poverty. Wealth differentials were vast, and more importantly, they had never been so visible. Mass communications enveloped the solar system. Transportation was almost instant. The majority of the population on every inhabited planet lived in relative poverty, depending on state benefits, short-term menial employment, and the proceeds of crime. Yet even the poorest could afford the radio and video links that provided a non-stop display of flaunted wealth and glamour. Even the poorest could afford the transmat fare to the retail palaces and the floating domes of Venus, or to the marble halls of the government offices on Earth. For the majority of humans, the solar system at the end of the 21st century was a taunting prison. A trip to the stars, however costly and risky, would have seemed an escape. I wish I had a recorder. Would I remember how to use it anyway? We left so much behind. Anything would be easier than this. Burnt slivers of wood and strips of old sheets. Children came in to see me this morning, asked me what I was doing, thought I'd gone mad. They'd never seen writing, of course, almost forgotten it myself. Don't know why I'm bothering, except that the androids reacted so strangely. I thought they'd stop me, I suppose, take away my carbon and my sheet, destroy it all. On the contrary, they stood at the end of the bed, turned their blank faces to each other like a pair of gateposts, and had one of their silent conversations. Turning back, they said in unison that my sheet of writing would be preserved in the colony's archives. Could I have a pen? I asked. And paper? They considered, whirring quietly. No, the corporation's rules did not allow the provision of implements for writing. I can't have much time left, hours perhaps. The pain isn't getting worse, but I've convinced myself I can feel the cancer growing inside me. Don't feel sorry for me though, I really can't complain. They say I'm the oldest surviving colonist now, have been for several years, the only man on the planet who wasn't born here. But I was always tough. You had to be living in the stop. Hard to remember those days. I must have been strong though. Sold litres of blood, sold a kidney and half my optic nerves, bought and sold bad zap in the tunnels, survived. All to raise the cash to buy a berth on a warp ship. Everything in Aryan Heights wanted out. Not just poor, but poor Europeans, the bottom of the heap. We didn't care where we went, mostly. I ended up here. Arcadia. And it really is. Land of milk and honey. I couldn't believe my eyes when I stepped out of the airlock. The mountains, the sweet air, the clean rain. It's got better since then too. It was rugged and wild, but we tamed it. Well, the corporation tamed it. Weather control, terraforming. The androids did the hard work, right back in the beginning. I didn't think a corporation would be that generous. I still can't work out what the corporation thought it would get out of this colony. They leave us in peace now, though. Just a few androids left. I can't make the kids understand that they're just machines. Perfect climate now. We built solid towns too, although it'll be difficult to build any more now that the rules forbid power tools, but it's very quiet, peaceful. There haven't been any more settlers, of course, so we have everything we want. And as I'm getting near the end, it doesn't matter now if I confess. I switched documents in the warp ship. According to my ID chip, I was going to become a baker, tradesman, no surname. So I switched with another guy. And now I'm head of the House of Delahaye on the council, hereditary advisor to that street sweetie who became the local princess. Her son came to see me yesterday, 12 years old and a prince. He had robes and everything, wearing a crown. These youngsters take it all so seriously. Like the corporation promised, we're living in the way that our ancestors did. No, better than that, because we have enough food and land and everything we could want. Just one fly in the ointment. It seems ungrateful to complain. After all, I've outlasted everyone who shipped in with me. Ginny went 5 years ago, just after Edwin was born. Another one of the corporation's rules, those daft names, supposed to make us feel in tune with the lifestyle here. But I'd like to see the children growing up. Richard will take over as head of the Delahays and he's barely 13 years old. As I say, I can't complain. At 38, I've lived longer than most in Arcadia. Unforeseen side effect of warp travel, the androids say. All colonists die young. Tough luck for us, but worse for those left behind. Our ship was among the last to leave Earth. Colonisation programme halted indefinitely. No escape from the stop now, at any price. But the kids won't listen when I try to tell them what things were like back home. The corporation have left us the androids, but they refuse to provide data about anything except Arcadia. There's something suspicious about the whole setup. The androids say that the corporation have abandoned the space station. The kids call it the moon now because they've picked up somewhere that a planet has to have a moon. But I know that silvery glint in the sky is a space station, and I still think it's watching us. But what can I do? Why should I care? I'll be gone soon, the last of the non-natives. Our children have taken over, and they do what the androids tell them, mainly. The androids have taken to calling themselves councillors. Very fancy. There'll be Delahays in Arcadia for hundreds of years, I guess, generation after generation. Before long, Earth and the solar system, everything except Arcadia, will have been forgotten here. Not even an old wives' tale. Just forgotten. It could go on for hundreds of years, thousands, unless the corporation decide to close the colony down. I can't make the children understand about the power of the corporation. Or unless someone comes here by accident. But what kind of ship, what kind of traveller would arrive in Arcadia by accident?
And a huge thanks to Dave for that. So now we're going to speak to the author. We had an interview with Peter Darvill-Evans, which we released very recently, and this is an extract from it, which we didn't include because we knew that we would be doing separate individual episodes on each of his novels. So sit back, relax, let's hear how the editor of The Range approached writing a book under the conditions he had set for others.
I'm Peter Darvill-Evans, that's the easy bit, that's who I am.
I remember having the writer's guidelines and saying, I'm sure you said something along the lines of, having set these guidelines for everyone else, it's only fair that I should put myself through them as well.
Yeah, that was the idea. I mean, I wanted to see whether they worked, possibly write a book according to my own strictures, and in the end, I'm not dissatisfied with this. But what I told Bex was that this was now the bar. Basically. Any submission that was better than Deceit would be worth considering for publication. Anything that was only as good as Deceit, it was kind of a because it was. I mean, I looking back, I can see, that it's got. Well, it works, but it's not a great piece of literature, and I wanted general standard to be higher than that. So I was by that. I mean, I was at that time. I had only so far at that time published 3 fighting fantasy game books. I guess by that time I'd also done Unlord the Roleplaying Marsh, but I wasn't a professional writer, and I think it shows in Deceit. I don't think a bit later on, but it was okay. It was adequate, and as I say, I was able to set the bar at that point and say better than this. But it was okay. I mean, it's not the worst fighting. It's not the worst. That's for sure. There are 1 or 2 that are worse. That's it. I tell me.
I think that this one was notable because it featured the character of Abslom Daak from the DWM comic strips.
Yes,
Was that
indeed.
your idea to pop them in, or did somebody else suggest it?
Well, we were working very closely with DWN, which was under the editorship of Gary Russell at the time. And they were, because between us and them, we were keeping Doctor Who alive. And DWN, Doctor Who magazine, they were very happy to have reviews of our books, to do our books. And I thought it was always about returning the favour, really, to use one of their characters in the books. And I was always looking for crossover. I was always looking for things that would enlarge the readership. I mean, my job was, I started off as a part-time editor. By now, I was signing letters publicly, and the managing director of Virgin Publishing would always say to me that I was the only one on the editorial staff who could understand the costings spreadsheet. Basically, is how you worked out whether a book was going to be profitable to publish. Said that I was the only one on the editorial staff who could understand that spreadsheet, and I'd had a very commercial attitude. I mean, there was, seemed to me, there were lots of good things about publishing these books. Doctor Who Alive, it was allowing us to publish, and more important than that, it was allowing us to publish previously published authors. Because we were able to do things that were the creative and the literary sense within the bounds of Doctor Who. But the whole thing would have been pointless if it wasn't commercially successful. Because, Virgin Publishing would have shut it down if we weren't profitable. So my attitude was always very, very commercially oriented, and I was always increase the numbers, increase the number, increase the print run, try and get more copies out. In fact, we reached a point where the books were very profitable, and we stayed in. There was a readership, and they were loyal, and it was good business. In fact, my department at Virgin Publishing became the kind of beating profitable heart of Virgin Publishing on the road.
That's fantastic, and must have been very pleasing for you. But how did you find writing the book? How did you find the process of the mechanics of putting a full-length novel of some 80,000 words plus together?
Well, that wasn't too difficult. I mean, I had written a novel before, this unpublished one, I had taken W.H. Allen. So I knew I could do it. I knew that it was 90,000 words, I think. And I'd written 3 fighting fantasy books, which are all about the same kind of length, actually, paragraph size chunks. And the way and by this time, we just consult my CV again. Because by the time I wrote Deceit, yes, by the time I wrote Deceit, I had written another book under an alias, because for the erotica were also published. I had already by this time written another novel, but I tend to work out. I mean, the main things you need to know about writing a novel, you need to know where it starts and where you intend it to end, and you don't need to know that much about the middle, as long as you know where it's going to end up, and you aim to get. But in fact, probably because of when you're writing a fighting fantasy book, you really do have to plot that infinite detail, a paragraph at a time, numbered paragraph, somewhere else. I tend to have a very whenever I'm writing a book, I tend to have a rather plot-heavy attitude, and I plan it. So I knew pretty much what all the way through, and what I tend to do is I write the skeleton, write a plan in some detail, and then I don't do much revision once I start writing. So I know what the plan is, I know where I'm going, I know what each chapter is going to contain, and I don't deviate much from writing the novel. So it didn't present me with that much in the way of difficulty. I mean, writing is. I always tell authors that writing shouldn't come easy. Yeah. I mean, you should have to tax your brains if are straightforward. But equally, it should be enjoyable. And the more you plan, the easier it is to get, because you're not having to get from point A to point B, which is the end. All you have to do is get from point A to point B, which is the end of the first chapter, then to point C, which is the end of the second chapter, then to point D, which is the end of the third chapter. So it's relatively straightforward process.
The idea for aging up Ace by sending her away and bringing her back as a slightly more hardened military figure, where did that come from? And of course, it led to those photos for the Ace book, which I loved and still do.
Yes. Well, it came from me. I mean, partly because the character of Ace, as she was on television, and she was meant to be a teenage girl. This ludicrous slang vocabulary, and not much in the way of style. But towards the end on television, if you remember the one which Ben Aronovich wrote, which the
Battlefield on TV.
Battlefield, that's the one. Yes, Sophie was actually allowed to dress in period clothing and play more like her real age. And I thought, well, this is better. This is, after all, we are writing books for adults. We don't really need to have a teenager as the Doctor's companion. What we need is to have a woman. And also, I thought that, and so I actually just based that on Ace's tendency to enjoy hitting things with a baseball bat and blowing things up. And I thought, well, this is when she grows up a bit, he's going to still be wanting to hit things very hard and blow things up. And so let's make her a very hardened military vet, which would contrast Bernice, who after all was an academic, also hard as nails, but an academic, and a bit of a innocent abroad in some senses in the world that the Doctor was taking it to, whereas Ace, very familiar with the Doctor's world and the kind of hardest to do. So that was the idea, and the good thing was that Sophie was on board with it as well. So that was also helped, because she also, I think, although she wasn't actually going to be playing the character, just liked the idea that her character would grow up, and so that's and I thought it was a really good idea, but not everyone did, and we did retire Ace again later on. But I think the thing is that the authors, and I wanted to move on. They wanted to move Doctor Who for the future, and given that that's what I always said I wanted to do too, I had to give up the adult Ace because the authors said, he's an old hat. We want to deal with new things, and given that was my stated policy as well, I had to go along with it.
Was the popularity of Bernice something that took you a surprise, and the fact that, as I said, the fact she's still going today as a character, it's incredible.
It is absolutely astonishing. Well, I wasn't. Yes, I suppose it was an experiment, and it could have gone wrong. After all, there was no guarantee that introducing a character would go down well with fans, with the readers of New Adventures, and the fact that it worked, very sensible, and I don't know about surprising, but it certainly could have gone the other way. Very pleased, and she, it is partly Paul's ability to character. He emerged fully formed after the war, and didn't require very much more character building after that. Fully formed, ready to go, straight off the blocks, and other writers were able very easily to write her into their stories very quickly.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. And if you want to hear the rest of his thoughts on looking after the New Adventures range, then find that episode. As I said, we shared it recently. Now, before we continue to have a look at the contemporary review and what fans think about it nowadays on Goodreads, we're going to pause once more and it's time to hand back to Dave Steele for a second reading from the book.
The grenade was snatched from her hand. She turned. There was no one behind her. Then she saw Daak swinging above her, hanging by one hand from a cable that ran up the stanchion, his other hand holding the grenade. He was already a couple of metres above the girder. He stuffed the grenade into the waistband of his tattered trousers and climbed higher, out of reach. "Daak!" De Vries started to shout. "That's our one hope!" "Shut it, Agent!" Daak yelled. "This has got to be sure. One grenade, that means one chance. We can't risk a throw. I'm going up there to that mass of spaghetti and I'm going to make sure." Ace looked up, tracing a route from the stanchion to a diagonal girder, an almost vertical cable, a narrow pipe and then a short piece of wider ducting. Yes, it could be done. It would need strength and agility, but Daak had plenty of both. Did she have the strength and agility to catch him? Probably not, she thought, but do I have a choice? Her gauntlets gripped the cable and her boots sought purchase on the metal upright. De Vries pulled her back. Ace swung around, her gauntlets curled into iron fists. De Vries ducked, fell, threw out her arms to save herself from falling off the girder. "Ace!" "Not here, Ace. Not now." De Vries's voice was calm, but her face was full of fear. "We're under attack, and we're 100 metres up." Ace shook her head angrily. "Sorry," she muttered curses at herself. "But you heard him. He's going to kill himself." "He'll be lucky if he gets the chance," De Vries said. "Look, he's attracting some attention. Professor Summerfield's a good shot, but she can't hold them all off. Get shooting, Ace!" There was a battle going on. Ace had been dimly aware of it for some time, but now she realised that beads of laser light were swinging in crazy arcs all around the stub of girder on which she and De Vries were standing. Only the reflective coating of her suit had prevented enemy weapons identifying her as a target, and it was in any case a miracle that none of the random energy pulses had hit her. The metal would withstand all but the most concentrated laser fire. It protected their backs, and protruding flanges gave them some cover on both sides. There was no sign of Benny, but Ace assumed that the Professor had taken up position on the other side of the stanchion. The attackers were androids with wings. They were barely humanoid, with bodies that dwindled from wide torsos to legless, conical abdomens. Their small heads were carried on long, flexible necks, and their blasters were housed in chest orifices. Wings made of plates of wafer-thin metal sprouted from a large dome on each android's back. Their flight was as erratic as the locomotion of their ground-travelling equivalents, but they were therefore difficult to shoot at. Both sides were using a great deal of laser energy to very little effect. Ace couldn't count them, but she thought there must be more than 20. Most of them were above Ace and De Vries, fluttering round the diagonal girder along which Daak was trying to climb. "Why doesn't he put that stupid chainsaw away and get a move on?" Ace thought, as she tried to target one of the androids. Daak had stopped halfway up the girder, and holding on with one hand, was flailing the air with his chainsword. None of the androids flew within reach of the weapon. "Got one!" Ace turned to grin at De Vries, but De Vries was too busy ducking and shooting as two androids swooped towards her position. Another android, one of its wings in shreds, fluttered towards the grey-brown expanse below. That, Ace reckoned, must have been Benny's. Daak was moving again now, swinging wildly from side to side in an attempt to avoid the laser's targeting. He hadn't stowed his chainsaw across his back, and Ace watched aghast as he swung himself too far, reached out with his left hand and failed to grasp the side of the girder. Ace fancied she could see the look of anguish on Daak's face as he relinquished his grip on his chainsword and grabbed the girder with his right hand. He and she, and even the androids, watched the chainsaw twist and tumble as it fell. It looked no larger than a pin when it finally hit the surface without a sound and disappeared. I hope he left it running, Ace thought. He might sever a few synapses.
Thank you so much for that again, Dave. Now, let's move on and see what the Contemporary Review had to say about Deceit. This appeared in Doctor Who magazine issue 198 and was the penultimate issue in which Gary Russell was the reviewer in Off the Shelf, the review column of the time. Let's see what Gary had to say. Of course, bear in mind that Gary had been commissioned to write Legacy, so will he be nice or will he be naughty? Let's find out. As my appreciation of the New Adventures novels varies depending on the maturity of the subject matter, and knowing that some of the more recent stories have not exactly been my cup of tea, I approached series editor Peter Darvill-Evans' entry into the canon with apprehension. After all, Darvill-Evans was responsible for the commissioning of Transit and The Pit, two of the least Who-ish of the lot, and two of the most recent. Would Deceit continue what I considered a downward trend? Such little faith. I should have known better. It's a good 'un. And yet, on the surface, it has a lot going against it. Once again, it concerns the rather tedious idea of a sentient computer and detailed wanderings through 3D simulated computer environments. Warhead, Transit, Love and War. Personally, I'm bored of computers. Secondly, it doesn't feature the Doctor and Bernice until we're some way into the story, looking again as if they were merely in as an added afterthought. That, thankfully, is not the case. We see here perhaps the ultimate use of the Seventh Doctor. Darvill-Evans uses this Doctor's astonishing and alarming mental manipulative powers to the fore, while the Doctor is aware of what is going on. Yawn! Unlike some examples of both TV and books, his foreknowledge and pre-planning actually didn't help him. This is due to a few of the wild cards thrown his way. One of those is Ace. Oddly enough, despite my liking for the character in TV, I'm none too pleased to see her back, especially as she is no longer the Ace we know and love. Now a hardened, rather embittered warrior, her bed-hopping, bloodlustful ways seem a bit too much of a radical jump from the rapidly maturing young lady seen in Nightshade and Love and War. Indeed, her original reason for leaving the Doctor is passed over rather cursorily, and she just gets back into the TARDIS at the end because she has nothing else to do. This, I feel, will have a detrimental effect on Benny Summerfield, a fascinating and likeable character who we haven't had anything like enough time to get to know. With writers in the future having to spread text over two companions, either one of them or the Doctor will suffer. I suspect it will be the latter, although upcoming experiments such as Birthright and Iceberg, the first is Doctorless, the second companionless, and both run almost simultaneously, may prove there is room for three people aboard the TARDIS. What Darvill-Evans does so successfully in Deceit is to tie up the loose ends and connections from other books, notably Warhead and Transit. By finally stabilising the Hooniverse that the new adventures take place in, this is expanded upon in the afterword, Deceit acts as a good springboard for the next batch of adventures, although oddly enough, there is still Lucifer Rising next month, before the loosely assembled Future History cycle closes. Long-time DWM readers will recognise Abslom Daak, Dalek Killer, the story's guest star. Although not Mr. Daak's #1 fan, I can see the appeal of the character, and his appearance in Deceit is certainly a great deal of fun. The banter between him and Ace is joyful, and makes him almost deserving of a place in the TARDIS roster permanently. The book has a legion of other colourful and interesting characters, most specifically Bell, leader of the troopers sent to discover the truth behind the colony planet Arcadia. Britta, the innocent corrupted both physically and mentally by the malevolent Lacuna, herself one of the whole book series' greatest baddies. The whole Arcadia setup is well developed, although similar things have been done to some extent in Doctor Who and other science fantasy before. Despite that, it remains a refreshing change to find that the political structure and livelihoods of the population can be easily ascertained without needing 3 months psychotherapy with the author's psyche to understand the basic settings of the tale. If Deceit is in any way a template for future instalments of the new adventures, then it's a good template. It's not going to threaten Nightshade Exodus or the Heist Science as contenders for the closest to real Who, a subject appraisal in itself, but far better than a lot of the books. It is coherent, entertaining, pleasantly easy to follow, and above all, it has a darned good story to tell, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not quite a rarity, but something that was beginning to look like an endangered species. There you go. I'd say that Gary Russell rather liked that one. However, what do you, the listeners / readers, think? Looking in Goodreads, Deceit has a rating of 3.06. It's had 313 ratings and 48 reviews. Of those, 9% were 5-star, 22% 4-star, 37% 3-star, 2 stars 24%, and 1 star 5%. Let's take a look at some of these reviews. There's a 5-star review from Paul Flint. He says, "Don't understand his bad reputation in Doctor Who circles. I really enjoyed this one. It's an original novel, and it had me riveted all the way through. I like the settings where the novel takes us into. A realistic vision of the future is clearly presented here. Particularly enjoyed the reintroduced Ace and how her character has evolved. All in all, a book I would highly recommend." There's a 4-star review from James. James says, Despite its weirdly poor reputation among many readers, Deceit comes off as one of the better entries in the Virgin New Adventures range. Competent space opera with some strong imagery. 3-star review from Laura. Laura said, "Would almost certainly have enjoyed this more if Abslom Daak wasn't in it. I'd read a comic anthology that featured him before, and he struck me as a pretty dull type of character, but this made me outright hate him. I really do not want to have to read about some creep repeatedly sexually harassing Ace." And there was finally a 2-star review here from Dawn. Dawn said, "I'd read all the terrible reviews of this book, but decided to read it anyway, due to it featuring the return of Ace. My impression? It's not clearly as bad as I'd been led to believe. It's a dull slog, yes, but not more so than Time's Crucible or others. Still, it's not exactly what one would call a good or exciting novel either, and it's certainly not worth the time invested in reading. Hopefully, I've now learned my lesson, and this is the last time I'll try reading a Who novel just because I'm interested in seeing some development, despite massive indications of it being little more than a time suck, which also sucks." Okay, I think we can say that Dawn did not enjoy this one. Well, that's us. We've reached the end. If you've enjoyed what we're doing in the Power of 3, and bear in mind we have got lots of new adventures coming up, you can always give us a nice review if you like on your podcast provider of choice, whether it's Apple Tunes or Podbean or anywhere else. Please do give us a rating, and it helps us get more listeners in the long run. That would be lovely. Thank you very much. You can find us on Twitter at Power of 3 Pod, and that's with a number 3. We're also on Facebook, where we have a group, and we'll be sharing the artwork that appeared in the DWM Prelude in there. And also, we're on Blue Sky, and you can find me at Finished Zine as my personal handle, so have a look there, and you can see other latest info on what we're doing on the pod. So, we've reached the end, and that means, of course, it's time to find a tune. But what could we possibly play out with? Well, if you're a long-term reader of Doctor Who magazine like I am, then there's a very obvious choice. DWM 167 came with a flexi disc, and this featured the theme from Abslom Daak, Dalek Killer, performed by the Slaves of Cain. This was actually Dominic Glynn, the TV series composer, and Martin Smith, and they performed as the Slaves of Cain, and this was released as part of a promotional flexi disc in DWM, and it was later released in various mixes on 2 singles. And the song features dialogue between Daak and the Daleks, where he's being voiced by John E. Machine. And no, I have no idea who John E. Machine is. But that said, I have the Infinite Address book, and I may just have to find out now. So, until next time, this has been the Power of 3, and I've been Kenny Smith. And these are the Slaves of Cain, with a little bit of the Stranglers thrown in.
We are the Daleks!
I am Abslom Daak, Dalek Killer.
The Daleks are the supreme rulers of the universe!
I'm gonna kill every damn lousy Dalek in the galaxy.
Exterminate! Exterminate!
Than I thought. I am Abslom Daak, Dalek Killer. Abslom Daak.